Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and I do hope that you're exceedingly well and that you've had the most marvellous, wonderful day and that you're about to settle down to have a fabulous evening. And don't forget to get that lovely hot cup of cocoa. Isn't it wonderful to have subscribers from so many different parts of the world, so many exotic and exciting places, and I value and appreciate you all so very much and send you loads and loads of love, because you're all very, very special. So before we get started, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Jane, and my Bigfoot encounter happened in 2012 when I was 12 years old. I come from a rural town in North America, but for the purposes of remaining anonymous, I'd rather not say where, in case one of the town's residents is actually listening. Not that I think that's likely, but you just don't know. I know that sounds paranoid, but I still do live in that small town today. And although things have invariably changed over the years, small towns do have their fair share of gossips. And that's one thing that never ever seems to change. So I don't want to end up being whispered about on the street corners, if you get my drift. I grew up in a very religious, rather humorless household, the single daughter of two very strict parents. My father was a practicing pastor, and he ruled our cosy bungalow with a rod of iron. Now, I'm not saying that to be mean, because my father was a very special, lovely person, but he was very disciplined. I soon learnt that I was different to other kids, as unlike other kids my own age, I was never allowed to watch television in case it impacted on me negatively by making me become worldly. Unlike other kids my age, I was also forbidden to own a cell phone, because I was told it would lead me down the wide road of destruction and away from the living God. The trouble with my parents is they literally rammed down my throat everything I was expected to believe. It was like they were stuffing a frog down my throat, which they were forcing me to swallow, and that's not easy, let me tell you. I could not challenge anything I was ever told. I just had to believe it as absolute fact, without asking questions and searching for my own authentic truth, which I rarely resented. I began to despise and loathe the God in the sky as a man sitting on a white fluffy cloud with a long white beard, steely blue eyes and glasses, who was cantankerous, disagreeable, grumpy, grouchy, and absolutely nothing you could do would ever be pleasing or good enough for him. Sometimes I believed he was looking at me all day, pointing his finger in an accusory way and condemning me for very, very bad and naughty behaviour. As my father was a local pastor, I was privileged to grow up in a very spacious plot of land, where our traditional whitewashed farmhouse was in close proximity to the church, which meant that our home and church were kept in meticulous, pristine condition by regular landscape gardeners that would mow the lawns weekly, and in spring and summer they would line the long driveway with beds of colourful flowers. Even our parking lot was lined with magnificent old oak trees, which was one of a kind because it kept all the cars cool in summer, which the congregation definitely appreciated, and was attractively dotted with terracotta pots filled with pretty colourful displays of flowers. If that wasn't pretty enough, it got better than that, because our land was flanked on the back with vast areas of public-owned national forest and rolling hills and mountainous valleys, and they literally swept back for many miles. And there was even a hiking trail from the side of our church that flowed directly into the woods and was open to the public throughout the year for walking and hiking purposes. It was also maintained every year by the Forestry Commission, which meant that the hiking trails were well open and spacious, and the forest was full of prime specimens of oaks, pines and spruce trees that were thriving. We were lucky because there was an abundance of white-tailed deer that would frequent our property regularly, and we would see them in the early evening tottering to our pond, which was in close proximity to our wooden deck, and we loved and adored watching them in the early evening, darting around our land. On some occasions we even saw other animals, like a rogue black bear from time to time, and even a mountain lion or a bobcat, and believe me, I would find such sightings absolutely thrilling. One day my father had a visit at our home from a frantic-looking woman who was in her early 30s, and he brought her into our house because the church was being renovated at the time, thanks to generous donations from our congregation, who believed the church needed a makeover. It appeared that she was in terrible distress, and believed that her 12-year-old girl was being visited at night by a terrifying female ghostly spectre in a black 1800s dress that looked rather like a strict governess, and this strange woman would stand over her daughter's bed saying, help me, please help me. What am I to do? The mother explained. My daughter refuses to sleep with the lights off, and she's so terrified of seeing that dreadful ghost again, that is tormenting her night after night, constantly begging her for help. I'm so terrified because I do not know if this entity is going to harm my child, and I have no idea what on earth to do about this. This is beyond my realm of understanding. I need the church's help. My father wanted to do all he could to help, although he did have very little experience in dealing with the paranormal, and usually passed on problems like this to a demonologist he knew, but he sensed that this case was more a cry for help from a ghost than something that appeared to be demonic, although he couldn't be sure, obviously. So he decided he'd investigate the case first, before he decided to get other people involved, so that he needed to see what needed to be done in a case like this. He asked me to come with him on this occasion, given I was the same age as the girl in question. He believed I could talk to her and find out things that were going on that she might be reluctant to share with the adults. It turned out he was absolutely right. The girl's name was Bess, and she was a typical 12-year-old like myself. At the time, she was reluctant to tell anybody what had happened to her because no one believed her. She had not even told her mother the complete story, but she was eager to share everything with me. I found out that one day on a trip home from her school, she was walking past the local cemetery, and it was during the daytime, but she was convinced she had seen the tall shadow of a woman in a black bustle skirt and long-sleeved lacy black bodice moving between the gravestones. She became frightened and walked home as quickly as she possibly could, because she had seen the pale, gormless face of the woman staring up at her and beckoning to her. I was so terrified, she told me, because I knew I'd seen a ghost. Even though she looked real, the way she was dressed, and even the way she walked, was not like someone from our time. I told myself that I had imagined things, but the very next day I was walking home from school all over again, and I developed a sudden insatiable urge to go and look over to the graves where I'd seen the lady the previous day. I nearly freaked out because I saw her again, moving between the gravestones, and she was beckoning to me, and for a moment our eyes just met, and she held my gaze. I couldn't look away. After that, I simply dropped my satchel onto the sidewalk and ran into the graveyard towards the grave where I'd seen the strange woman. Now, I promise you, that's not normal behaviour for me, because I'm easily spooked, but for some reason I was compelled to go to those graves. Well, I asked, did you actually see her up close? The ghost of the woman, I mean. No, but I did discover a very old grave from the 1800s, with a woman's name on it, Elizabeth Maxwell Phillips, and then the whole grave had appeared to be vandalised with red painting on it, saying, I curse you to hell, in paint. It was painted all over this woman's grave, and it had been recently done, and I mean recent. Wow, I said in horror. Who would have tried to destroy a grave like that from such a long time ago? Isn't it sacrilege? Do you suppose it was the grave of the woman you saw between the gravestones, beckoning to you? Maybe that's why she needs you to help, to get rid of the painted curse on her tombstone. I never thought of that, said Bess, looking at me in amazement. Maybe that's why when I saw her at the end of my bed, she kept saying, help me, please help. She did seem desperate, I must say. I told my father all about Bess's story, and he believed it was possible that this ghostly apparition of the woman was distressed by the vandalism on her grave, and he thought we should do our very best to try and remove it. Unfortunately, the grave was incredibly old and weathered, and it was impossible to get rid of that bright red paint, however hard we tried. My father finally told his congregation the entire story, and we raised enough money to buy this woman from the 1800s a brand new headstone, and we had a service on her behalf at her grave and laid down a huge bouquet of pretty flowers for her. Every year we still go back to that gravestone and put flowers on her grave, on the anniversary of her death. And some members of our church still visit that woman's grave today regularly because there are always fresh flowers on her grave. So she is still very much in people's thoughts, which I think all these years later is pretty incredible. My father also looked into the background of this curious woman to find out what it was that could have caused someone to curse her grave in the violent way and that they apparently did. We discovered that this woman had played an instrumental role in the 1800s in speaking up about women's rights, and possibly the person who vandalised her grave was a misogynist of some kind, who may contribute the changes in today's society towards women as being a result of women from the past, like Elizabeth, who was one among many women instrumental in the time in the metamorphosis of change for women's rights in the 20th centuries. We could be wrong about this being the reason for the vandalism, but that is what we actually concluded. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but I know that Bess never had any more encounters with the woman again, but believe it or not, I did. One night when I went to bed, I was awoken to a strange sound of someone shuffling in my room, and it did feel like someone was nudging me. So I looked up, and there was the woman whose tombstone had been vandalised. She was standing at the end of my bed, and she was clearer than day. That was how sharp she was. I could observe every detail of her face. She looked as real as you or me. I remember she was about 5'7". She was long and lean, but wearing a very dark bustle skirt, so typical of the time. Her hair was pinned back in a very severe bun. She had fair skin and big brown eyes. I heard her say, "Thank you," just like that. And then she dematerialised before my eyes. I phoned Bess immediately to tell her what had happened, because we'd become firm friends by then. And I believe she was reaching out to have that vandalism on her gravestone removed, and she was thanking us for the new gravestone. The prayers, the pretty flowers on the gravesite. She possibly believed I'd helped her, and I suppose in retrospect, I probably did. As a young girl, I was rebellious about some of the things my parents believed. Every Halloween there would be a sign on our front door that read, "We do not do Halloween here." It really, really upset me in more ways than you can ever imagine, because I knew many church-going people who celebrated Halloween. However, my parents definitely didn't. I loved dressing up, and the idea of wearing a witch's costume and covering our house in carved monster pumpkin faces, fake spider webs, and spooky regalia was terribly exciting to me. All my friends at school were getting so caught up in the excitement of Halloween, and I felt incredibly left out, because my parents described Halloween as the devil's holiday, so there was no trick or treat for me, I can assure you. I completely disagreed, and believed my parents were being incredibly unreasonable. But one day I hatched a brilliant plan. I had 4 girlfriends who all came from very strict religious homes like myself, and who had parents that were equally as adamant that they would not be allowed to celebrate Halloween in their own homes. These children were equally as disenchanted and unhappy not to be engaging in all the exciting festivities that Halloween naturally brings to the table. I asked my mother if I could have my friends over for a sleepover and pizza, and I think she did actually feel sorry for me and a little guilty because she finally agreed. "Well, at least you're all in the same boat," she said. "Parents that won't let you celebrate Halloween. But believe me, one day you'll actually thank me." I made a face behind my mother's back because I thought my parents were boring and pathetic and just taking their faith way too seriously. Did God have no sense of humour or fun, I wondered? Bear in mind that all my friends staying over at my house for a sleepover had never ever been allowed to celebrate Halloween for a day in their lives, and we all decided that this year things would be incredibly different. My friend Jenny had hired 4 Halloween costumes for us, and we had brought sweets and snacks. We were planning to have our own Halloween celebration in the woods, where the hiker trail is on my land. We would slip out during the night after my parents had fallen asleep, and we didn't even need to use the front door because I was fortunate enough to have a large sliding window in my bedroom that gave us easy access in and out of doors, and it was only 3 feet off the ground. We would also stuff our beds with pillows in case my parents looked in on us so that it would look like we were all very much asleep. It was a trick that had worked well for me in the past and had never once let me down. Fast forward to midnight on Halloween, and my house was literally filled with the sound of silence, apart from the excited whispers from me and my 4 friends, who were counting the minutes until the witching hour. And for us, the excitement level was off the charts, because we were doing something that would horrify our parents if they were to find out. It was so exciting dressing up in witches' costumes and putting on green lipstick on my face, an ugly black mole, very white makeup and thick black eyeliner. We all looked amazing in our Halloween costumes, even if I say so myself, and when it was midnight we quietly slid out of my bedroom window and climbed out very carefully, taking care not to make any noise, and we wore headlights on our heads and gathered our bags of goodies as we ran into the woods, sprinting down the hiking trail as fast as we possibly could. As we entered the woods, we found it to be unusually quiet, which was a little unsettling, but that was all right because tonight was all about being very scared. That's what we wanted because it was Halloween. We heard no crickets, frogs or even owl calls, as it was incredibly still, and although none of us expressed any anxiety, I think we were a little bit on edge, as we did feel something was distinctly off, but no one was prepared to admit that. We could see clearly because thankfully the forest canopy was open enough to allow the moonlight from the pearly white moon and silvery stars to send pretty shafts of light onto the forest floor. We managed to find an open clearing where we laid down a cloth on the ground and prepared a midnight feast that really was designed to celebrate Halloween. We had monster potato chips, spider jelly sweets, black iced cookies decorated with monsters, and we quite literally had the works. We sat there on the forest floor dressed in our Halloween costumes and taking turns to try and scare each other with strange acts. We were all laughing, screaming and giggling at all our actions, and some of them were quite frightening, even if I say so myself. I got up to prepare my own little witch's act, designed to scare everyone half to death, and I was really getting into the part when suddenly we heard this galloping sound. It was as if a ton of horses were bolting through the forest all at once. Our first reaction was to hide. "Something's coming," I said. "Hide now!" Whatever was coming towards us sounded dangerous, like you needed to get out of the way because these things were monstrously huge, and I think we sensed danger. We all immediately hid behind this huge tree, which had a girth so big that all 4 of us could take cover behind the trunk, with relative ease, I'm glad to say. Then we saw them, and it was a them. 3 monstrous creatures, the likes of such that I have never ever seen before. And they were quite literally monsters that looked like they had descended from the depths of hell itself. In that moment, I did begin to wonder if someone was playing a horrifyingly sick joke on us to scare us half to death. I looked at my friends suspiciously, examining their expressions to see if they were showing any signs of giggling, which would be clearly evident if they were trying to suppress any giggles. All the white faces of my friends were a picture of absolute horror, so what we were seeing was clearly authentic and was not a prank. They were as shocked, appalled and horrified by what we were seeing as indeed I was. I studied the creatures clearly from where we were hiding, and then I realised very suddenly that they were Bigfoots. I had seen television coverage about these creatures before, and my father had assured me that it was all fictitious and there was no such thing as Bigfoot. But he was wrong, as he was about many things. I was in no doubt that we were staring at Sasquatches. These hairy humanoid giants have got to be the most terrifying creatures I have ever seen in my entire life, because they were utterly colossal. I think that's what got me the most, is the sheer size of these things. They were burly, wide and thick. I would say they range between 8 and 10 feet tall, about 4 feet wide, and between 800 to 1,000 pounds, and that's not exaggerating. They were covered in black thick hair and had cone-shaped heads that literally blended in seamlessly to the most monstrous bulky shoulders that you've ever seen in your entire life. Hiding there behind the tree, I felt equally as frightened and intimidated as I think I would possibly feel if I was in close proximity to a rhino or a lion, especially if they were sniffing around me, These creatures were on a par with those major dangerous predators, and I'm not joking when I say that either. They also did smell foul, like garbage, death and decay. The largest of the Bigfoots was sniffing the air, and I realised suddenly that he was smelling us. I was trembling violently, my heart was thumping and pounding in my chest, and I was incapable of making a decision in that moment. Should we hightail it out of the forest as fast as we could, or should we just stay still and hope with all our hearts that these creatures didn't notice us? The Bigfoot stumbled across our cloth, and he picked it up off the ground and scattered all our picnic goodies all over the forest floor. When he lifted the cloth to his nose, he let out the most terrible thunderous roar that went right through us. Truly, my whole body vibrated under its noise. He then proceeded to shred our cloth into pieces as if it was nothing. Now that is difficult to do. He lifted up some of the jello spiders, smelt them and threw them across the forest floor with a look of total disgust and revulsion on his face. He clearly did not appreciate jello spiders. I knew the creature sensed our presence because he was roaring and thumping his chest violently and clearly expressing his extreme dominance. The other two creatures began to roar, as if inspired by his lead, and I began to feel as if I was in a lion's den. "We have to run," I whispered to my friends, "because those creatures, they're going to kill us." Carol looked at me in terror. "I can't run," she said. "I'm shaking so much, and I feel as if I've got no strength left in my body. You can't make me run." "But we have to run," I said. "They're going to kill us." Suddenly we just started to run. There was just no word for it, we just had to run. And then we heard these monstrous heavy feet thundering behind us. I could sense something grabbing me from behind. But he'd got hold of my huge witch's hat, and thankfully not me. I continued to run faster than I've ever run in my life, and I looked back ever so briefly to see the creature studying my witch's hat, as if he was trying to make sense of the long triangular funnel shape, and the distraction was giving us a distinct advantage as far as our escaping was concerned. I even saw the creature attempting to put my witch's hat on his head, and it would have been funny if we weren't just so terrified. "Throw your hats on the ground," I instructed as we ran. I saw my friends throwing off their hats, and I could see the dark, hairy, humanoid creatures running towards the items and examining them with a curious interest. The distraction appeared to be working, and it gave us enough time to get back into my bedroom window. We were panting and breathing heavily because we were so out of breath. We could see the Bigfoots moving towards my house, but they were not in any rush and appeared to start walking slowly, and they were caught up in a discussion about our hats. We could hear them chattering backwards and forwards to each other. It was like they were passing the hats around and examining the shining material and sparkling bling, especially the princess silvery crown Julia had been wearing. The hats became an earnest topic of interested conversation among the Bigfoots, and they began to chatter excitedly among themselves and turned around, walking back into the forest, holding all our hats as if they were trophies of some kind. I really believe our strange hats were such a powerful distraction and diversion that they completely forgot about us. I don't know whether they would have actually hurt us or not, but they certainly scared the living hell out of us. And after that event, we were quite happy to spend our Halloweens eating pizza and having an early night. I think even my parents wondered why I never made a fuss about Halloween ever again. So there you are. That's my very peculiar story. But I never ever told my parents about my Bigfoot encounter. But let me assure you of this. Those creatures are indeed real, because I've seen them myself. They're probably out there in the forest right now, as I speak. I have been told by people who know more about Bigfoot than I do, that the creatures that I encountered were just being territorial and probably would never have hurt me. Maybe they're right. But over the years, my father and mother did let me take my own path, which I really appreciated. And then I did, in fact, become a Christian. but I got there on my own terms, not dictated to by my parents. So there you are. That's my story. Well, thank you so much for your incredible story. What a fascinating story. I really loved it, and I'm sure that my listeners did too. So until next time, goodbye and good night.